Okay, delighted to say I'm joined by Eddie Brennan. Many All-Irelands in the pocket, Eddie, at this stage, and these days you're stuck training the likes of me with Kula. But anyway, how are you doing this evening?
Yeah, it'd be easier training kids. No, all good. Yeah, sure. I think it's all looking forward to the weekend. I suppose I'm going to start with something a little bit controversial, but it's just disappointing, I suppose, really, with what's after happening with the two matches the weekend, that both aren't separated a little bit better. I think we'd all love to be able to take them in some way, but look, it is what it is.
Yeah, Saturday, this was the situation a few weeks ago as well, when we had 3 games on a Saturday and 1 on a Sunday. You'd like if it was spaced out a little bit more, and even the Joe McDonagh as well. So on Saturday, Clare Wexford is on at 1:30, Laois Waterford at 2, then 5 o'clock the Joe McDonagh final, Dublin Kilkenny at 7:30, and then the next day it's Tipp against Limerick 4:15. You think they could space it out a little bit better?
Yeah, sure. Look, I think any of us that have interest in it at all, you'd love to be able to take them all in, and I suppose that's probably just the way things are at the moment. We've been starved with for so long that when you get the matches coming along, you'd love to have the options to take as many of them in as possible. And I think I just even see today, I think there's a decent bit of upset. I suppose really the whole situation with Sky now is coming to roost at the moment, because people can't go to matches and now they haven't got them on free tier. So I suppose there's a very, very understandable frustration with that. I think it's very, very disappointing for a lot of people, particularly, I suppose, maybe maybe older people that just can't get to matches, and you'd say that's very, very disappointing that our national games, it should be there for all to access. That's the reality.
Yeah. So we jump into the matches that are going to happen this weekend. Dublin against Kilkenny. So it's did you expect Dublin to do what they did against Galway, winning 119 to 115? I think most people were kind of thinking Galway, second best team in the country, they'll waltz into the final.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say, and we all got that badly wrong. I think it's probably down to the fact that Dublin had a very indifferent league. There was no telltale signs that this was on the cards, and I think usually sometimes you get that. And then I think the other side of it is you look back at maybe last year and you could arguably say the second half they turned in against Kilkenny was maybe showing that this Dublin team are starting to click a little bit, that there's something there, and that Mattie has, I think that's something he'll probably look at this week. They've definitely looked at that and say, how did they get such an innings into that match, and how did they do that? And you're saying if you're looking for something recent against Kilkenny, well, that's probably it. Obviously, look, it moves on too. They're a good team now. I think after 2 good performances, I think, look, obviously Antrim, I felt was a match that they needed to be on their game. They needed to be ultra professional, because Antrim were potentially, on the back of the league, going to give them something really tough to deal with. And to be fair to Dublin, I think they really, it was just a real David and Goliath ultra professional approach. They'd done their business. They'd done it very efficiently and very ruthlessly. And hence then, I still think, we would have all been waiting, for Galway to kick into gear. But to be fair to Dublin, I described them as a pack of hungry dogs, and I mean that in the best possible sense. They were that. And you'd have to hand it to Mattie. He came with a game plan. Galway just couldn't figure out.
Just dropping a small bit there at the moment. I'm not sure if you can hear me, Eddie, but Mattie seemed to have a little bit. Yeah, Mattie seems to have a little bit of a number over his own county in Galway, and obviously you and your Laois team beat Mattie's Dublin after they beat Galway a couple of years ago, or whatever, as it was a couple of years ago. Now, why is it 2 years ago now? What do you think has much changed in Dublin between now and then? Because after last season, everyone was thinking Mattie might be on the way out after this season if it doesn't go well after the way they lost to Cork. But has much changed in that Dublin team in the last couple of years, do you reckon? I know they had a few injuries against you. I'm sure you had too. But you mentioned the ultra professional job they did against Antrim. That's another game that people would have thought, okay, this will be a bit of a banana skin here, but no, they were ruthless in that game, scoring 331.
Yeah, no, I think for me that was what it was coming in, and I spoke about it and said they would have to be very much on their guard, because Antrim had momentum off the back league, so the signs were there. But to be fair to Dublin, they heeded them, and they just went about their own business in a very ruthless manner. But I think what has happened is he has probably rebuilt this team a little bit. I think it's probably there's a decent few new faces in there since 2 or 3 years ago when Mattie took up with these boys. I think he has built this team nicely. I think you've seen some of the senior guys move on. I think Liam Rush has come back into a little bit of form as well, which is important. And probably on top of that, then you have a couple of good seasoned lads like a guy I singled out for a little bit of praise there last week and recently. And I suppose I wasn't sure whether he was going to get to that level, but Danny Sutcliffe is absolutely flying it at the moment. He has really matured into a proper captain and a proper leader for Dublin, and wading in with points. And I think if you were looking at him the last day, he done that his little trick, which is the dipping of the shoulder and cuts back in and lobs over a great point. But he got 3 massive points the last day. So all in all, I think this is
just dropping a small bit again there.
A little experience, but there is a few new lads gone in around that squad.
And what about the injury to Eoin O'Donnell? He came off the last day, and all the talk is some technical problems. But all the talk is that maybe Eoin O'Donnell might miss this game. He seemed like somebody who's like very kind of suited to, in terms of who Dublin have marking TJ Reid, because TJ Reid went to town at the start of the game last year, which was part of the reason that Kilkenny went so far ahead. Like if he's out, does that really push it towards Kilkenny?
Possibly does, because if I remember correct, I think James Madden was possibly the one to follow TJ in the first half, and then I think Owen went over on him in the second half, and maybe that was the key to what happened in the second half. So yeah, I think he's a huge loss. I think his form has been really good in both those matches, and particularly I think if we want to see another blockbuster of a match, he is a very important player for Dublin. He did miss the match with us in 2019 in O'Moore Park. So he is an important player for Dublin. So you'd be hoping, look, from an interest of a spectacle. But I suppose if I'm to put on my Kilkenny jersey, you definitely say that's a plus to not have him there. It remains to be seen. I haven't even heard a whole lot whether he's in or out. My I suppose analysis of a hamstring injury. If someone pulled a hamstring 2 weeks ago and had to limp off or looked as if they were limping, I think in the modern game it's very hard to see how somebody with a bad hamstring is going to play.
Yeah, and even after Kilkenny's win over Wexford after extra time, 237 to 229, we were kind of talking about this is the game that kind of re-establishes Kilkenny, because so many panellists got to play, so many players stood up. I mean, that could be very much the making of this Kilkenny team.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because I think a lot of us in Kilkenny were concerned about the maturing of this team. I felt as well coming into this, there's a core of lads there that I probably worked with in 2016 and 17, and I felt that they have to stand up and deliver. And I think in fairness to them, Wexford equally have presented a very, very formidable challenge to Kilkenny in recent years, and Kilkenny have struggled to figure them out. So I think all in all, you'd have to say they have turned a little bit of a corner. Now, it remains to be seen. It's important that you do that one day and get a monkey off. Obviously, if you're going to go somewhere and if you're going to compete with, the Limericks of this world who are the All-Ireland champions, you're going to have to kick on and go further. So I think, we got a good bit of game time into a lot of lads in the squad. I think it was good to see the likes of James Bergen get a bit of game time in a tough match like that for a couple of scores. Kilkenny have to stack up the performances now if they are going to go on and compete. And look, a Leinster title would be massive. 2 years to put 2 back to back would be savage now. And there was a time maybe from outside of that people didn't think that was massively significant, but it certainly is now.
And you had plenty of these players at under 21 level with Kilkenny. Did you expect a lot of these players to come through? Am I right in saying Hugh Lawler was he midfield with you with the under 21s? He's obviously full back now.
Yeah, we had Hugh. He started off midfield in Dublin in the game in Nolan Park, and he broke his thumb that day, and he missed most of the year for us, unfortunately. Now he was back for the All-Ireland final, but Hugh is a really good player, very, very committed, very brave. He'll just, he's a guy who will just go toe to toe with somebody. And I think he's comfortable on the ball. He's well able to hurl. And even Paddy Deegan too. I think Paddy Deegan is a guy who's as honest as the day is long. He just gives you absolutely everything. A little bit raw and unpolished at times, but I like that. I think, I think if you were to say there's a good yellow card to get, I think he got a really good one last day against Wexford. I think he kind of laid down a bit of a marker, and himself and Lee Chin have a nice bit of history. I was in Nolan Park years ago, and the two bet lumps out of each other on and off the ball. So I think sometimes there is such thing as a good yellow card, but I think it was a sign maybe that Paddy Deegan was throwing down the challenge. And look, there's other guys around there. I think some of the forwards, my own clubmate, obviously Billy is coming on, and he's getting more consistent game time. He's delivering a couple of points in every match. So all in all, look, I would have worked with a lot of those guys, and yeah, you definitely say a lot of them were going to be making up a good core of the squad. So I think it was important also that they actually delivered, because they're probably hitting along the last couple of years and finding their feet at senior level.
Did you expect Owen Cody to kind of announce himself quite that way? He's obviously in a young hurler of the year already, so he clearly has a bit of class. But I mean, that was a serious performance, and he started off like he caught the first couple of high balls in. I think it was maybe Simon Donoghue who caught the ball over, but like his threat was there immediately.
Yeah, he's a big unit. He's a big, powerful unit, and I suppose what maybe a lot of people, I'm sure most people know at this stage, the Shefflin blood there. So I think he reminds me a lot of Henry in some of his mannerisms and how he strikes the ball and that. But yeah, no, I remember talking to Jackie Tyrrell there two years ago when Martin in the county final. It was Jackie's last county final with Stevens, and he said, he kind of went from, or when they shook hands, he said he'd give him a rattle, and he said he bounced off him and that was maybe 2 years ago. So he said, big, strong, physical fella, well able for whatever way you want it. And I think what you're probably seeing even a little bit with Kilkenny the last day was the aerial dominance again, and Owen Cody showed that he'll deal with that comes in low and tasty in front of him. But he's well able to fight for his ball. He's well able to deal with man two in and how to take the engagement that comes along. They're a team that when they're marking guys, they really do mark you. They're stuck to you, and I think he showed that he was well able for that. But I think the performance was probably one of you'd expect of a mature forward. So again, it's good for a guy of his age, 21 years of age, to be showing a performance like that.
And then at the opposite end of the scale, TJ Reid's 33, 34 later in the year, but he played 90 minutes at a match, and his influence grew and grew. Like, were you surprised to see that he was still so influential, going so deep into the game, when maybe Wexford were the team where lads were getting more cramped up?
No, I don't think too much surprised you with TJ. He's a free nature, really. Back in 2012, he had his knee broken in that All-Ireland final, and I think when he was rehabbing that, I think the whole physical conditioning side of things was probably what clicked with him. He obviously has a business now built on that area of work, we'll say, with gym work and that. So it's something that he obviously has great knowledge of. But I think as a guy gets older, they get to know their own body. They know how it works for them, and they know what keeps them right. And in fairness to him, he has not been injured since. He doesn't miss a match with muscular injuries. And I thought the last day what really stood out for me was when Kilkenny were stepping off Wexford and then engaging around the 45. I seen him twice telling his other teammates to stick remain. He dropped off, and then he just launched at whoever it was, and he just is really good and disciplined with his tackling. He's able to get the ball. I know you could throw in the Cyril Farline that he's a wizard, but he really is. He knows how to engage a guy and not get pinged for fouling.
Yeah. Do you see with Walter Walsh, he came in and scored 1-1. The bench scored 1-8 actually. When Colin Fennelly stepped away, there was probably this thought that the Kilkenny panel just wouldn't have the strength there anymore. And there was even question, like you could name, when you were playing on the Kilkenny team, a lot of time you could name 13, 14 lads that are going to start throughout the season. Whereas now people were even wondering, will Cody be able to kind of figure out his team and get the right blend? But it's all looking rosy now.
Yeah, it's a positive, definitely. I personally felt the Colin Fennelly situation was a very strange situation. I thought it was, for a senior as he was, to say he was taking a year out. I don't know, not too many lads get to do that with Brian Cody. That when you're 30 plus, you tell him you're taking a year out. That I thought personally a funny situation, but it is what it is. It has presented Brian with opportunities to give to other guys. I think James Bergen has definitely filled into the vacuum there, and he's a guy who came on the last day and delivered a couple of really important scores. So yeah, look, I think you'd have to say Brian is happy with where things are, and I think if there's one thing that Kilkenny probably have at the moment, they have to have an absolute incredible desire and hunger, and I think that's going to be eating off the more senior. I think you see Kiely coming in and contributing as important as he is. So all in all, I think there's a nice blend there. Like I said, the guys that have come in, that have been there the last 3 or 4 years, some of them are starting to mature now a little bit. They're starting to find their feet and really bring a level of consistency to it. And like you said there, when you have the impact that Kilkenny got off the bench last day, that's important. And then how did they do some of it? Yeah, they've evolved into that game of being able to step back and build out from the back and carry the ball through the lines. But again, you look at how they got the last day, a very basic ball straight down on top of Walter, and they got a height deficit there. They had Walter Welsh paired off on Sean Murphy, and you're talking nearly a foot and a half an advantage there, and they made it count.
So how difficult do you think it was it's continuing to happen, but for teams to change into whatever the modern side of hurling is now, which is carry the ball out from the back, running off the shoulder, that type of stuff, because it was so different for so long. Well, it's always just been kind of let the ball do the work. But how difficult is it for teams to sort of react and do this? And how far down the line do you think Kilkenny are?
For me, I suppose I've seen whereby show they're evolving and during the league, and then suddenly it's default back. And I think a few years ago they played Tipp down in Nolan Park, and they went to go short a little bit. I think Darren Brennan was in goal, and 1 or 2 were intercepted, but they got a couple of really good scores where they carried the ball up the field and they worked it out and got those scores. And then the second half, Darren Brennan just sculled everything long. So that was a clear instruction, I think, for management to say, look, just put it long. And I think that has happened a few times with Kilkenny, where they show that they're evolving a little bit. You take Dublin down in Nolan Park a few years ago, they had to really come out and work the ball through the lines in the second half to get going in that game. But now I think what happened last year in the All-Ireland semi-final against Waterford was probably just the catalyst for it to say, look, lads, we have to be flexible. We have to be able to blend from one system to another. I think probably the key, Shane, is that you can't be all one way and not another way, because there's too many variables involved in hurling. Yes, you want to enforce yourself on the game, you want to enforce your style and your setup of your team on the game, but you to take into account that the 15 players playing against you are going to do equally the same. So somewhere in between, you'll have a time in the match where you're on the up, other times you're under the cosh. But I think particularly for Kilkenny last year, Waterford just ran them into the ground in the second top of the half back, which Brian looked at in a big way and say, Waterford just dropped the ball on top of puckouts down top of that back line. And that is just that's a zone that has always been sacrosanct with Kilkenny. You can't be dictated and dominated on your own 45 with your halfbacks. And I'd imagine that they just looked at it and said, look, we have to make sure that doesn't happen again. But equally, I think the big one was the running game that Waterford brought. So Kilkenny have had to say, look, we have to be able to one with the other and mix it up. And I think significantly, Shane, probably what it is that with high octane matches now, when you get to the final 10, 12, 15 minutes, lads are starting to run on empty a little. So therein maybe is the time of the match that maybe you have to go a little bit more direct in at that stage. Maybe you have to have guys that you can have an outlet that your defenders just haven't got the energy to carry the ball anymore. So therefore we need to get fresh legs in and maybe then go with your outlets of your target men off the puck out.
Do you think, just to even jump on to Tipperary, who'll play Limerick this weekend, when they played in the Munster final in 2019, Tipp only won 5 of their 29 puckouts. Sean Flynn did a great article about that in the Nina Guardian. Have you seen enough evolution in Tipperary to think that they could sort of close the gap, even in that particular area of the puckouts, or that they're good enough at carrying the ball out?
Yeah, it's. I think when you look back on even that Munster final in 2019, it was clearly a strategy of Limerick's to target. I think they isolated James Barry a little bit to take the puck outs, and then they engaged him, and I think they got a goal out of that. I think Kyle Hayes possibly got a goal out of that. So, they aerially they dominated him as well. So I suppose for me, I think Tipp, they definitely have evolved, but I think even last, I thought they got their tactics really spot on. In that, John Conlon dominated the centre. So what did they do? They put bubbles on him and got him to fire out around edges, go to put things, and they just stayed out of the middle. So it presented John Conlon with a dilemma: do I stick or twist? What do I do here? So I think Tipp will always have a little bit of a tactical noose or a card up their sleeve that they will play. And I'm very interested to see what they're going to do, because I think it's fair to say Limerick have had them whatever way they wanted the last couple of years, both physically, aerially, on the grounds. Even last year, I was just really taken back by how they dismantled Tipp in such horrendous conditions, because I thought if they lobbed Cian Lynch in centre forward. I think it was something that definitely caught the Tipperary management by surprise, because now they had Alan Flynn earmarked to go marking him, and suddenly they were taking one of the Mars, be it Brendan or Porrig or whoever it was, out of centre back. So that left Tipp with a dilemma straight away from the win, and it just settled he. And whether it or not, Tipp ended up playing the match on Limerick's terms. And I think Tipp being Tipp, and Liam Sheedy and Eamon O'Shea, the boys, they will always want the match played on their terms. And I think that's something that they will focus on this Sunday, and I think they should focus on that. They're mindful of the challenge that Limerick are going to present. But I definitely think, Tipperary can't just stand back and, invite a team like Limerick on them and say, look, we're going to curtail them. I think Tipp have to try and force themselves on Limerick a little bit.
I was actually trying to think earlier today, have expectations ever been as low in Tipperary about playing Limerick in a match? Because obviously they've had Tipperary every way they want them the last couple of years, as you were saying. But even some of the players probably that we relied on so much for the last couple of years probably not being as prominent, like Paddy Maher's having some difficulty at full back, Nolan McGrath taking off midway through the second half, John McGrath not going well, Seamus Callanan doing okay, well, doing pretty well, but like he's not at 100% either. Like, have you ever seen Tipperary as such outsiders in a match against Limerick? Like, historically, I can't really think of a time.
No, you'd have to go back a while since it's been like that, and I think Tipp will always back themselves, against Limerick, no matter what it is. But yeah, I think it's a process of where both moments. I still think under day Tipperary have good enough hurlers. I think for me, I felt this year the dilemma for Liam Sheedy was, does he go with his tried and trusted lieutenants that probably delivered him an All-Ireland in 2010 and came along and a second one in 19. There's still a core of guys that I think he brought through a couple of minor All-Irelands.
Third one in 19.
And well, his second. But I think that was the dilemma for him this year. Does he invigorate the team with some fresh young blood from those under 21 and under 20 All-Ireland successes? Does he bring those guys through? Does he give him time? Build time? Another year was to bring me into maybe, is this going to be Liam's, final year possibly? So I think that could be reflective in his team selections. I think, does he press his old Warriors one more time and hope that they can deliver one more? Or if he starts invigorating with new players, is that a sign that he's building for the future? And yeah, look, I suppose when you have been to the well a few times with some guys, what's in their bellies, and I think that probably is the trick of any great manager, is maybe to know when a guy or two maybe have, maybe their best days are behind them, and then it's how to use them. And I think that's probably the tough management and tough.
just breaking up a small bit there again. Is just to even, I don't know if you saw, I presume you saw the game between Limerick and Cork in the Munster semi-final. Would you have seen any crumbs of comfort for teams coming up against Limerick? Did you think Cork got much joy? I thought a couple of times Cork played total hurling, the way they worked the ball out from the back and like their speed and their overlaps and obviously their skill and all that. But would you see any crumbs of comfort there for Tipperary and the other opposition in what you saw in the match between Limerick and Cork?
Yeah, well, I still think no matter what happens, you look at Limerick, they tick a lot of boxes, right? I still think that Tipperary have, a natural hurling ability and skill level that will allow them to compete with anybody. It's probably then maybe to get two other areas right, and that is their absolute hunger and desire. Then maybe that tactical nuance that's going to give them a tactical ploy maybe that's going to come into it, and I think they'll definitely look at that match and say Cork, when they told hurling, they probably still had opportunities maybe to nail Limerick a little bit more, and they just didn't convert. So I think if Tipp come with a huge hunger, and again that to me is going to be a significant factor, then it's going to be maybe what kind of a game plan they can roll out on the day that's going to rattle Limerick. Because Limerick, to be fair to them, they don't deviate too far off setup. They play those 6 guys at the back, from the 45 back. I think Darragh Donovan and Will work for me. That goes relatively unseen. They break up a lot of rucks, a lot of ball being carried through, and it's a very selfless game that both of those guys play. So it's maybe what Tipperary decide to do. It's can they maybe get a bit of joy out of carrying the ball out, because Limerick love to engage around 5. So I'm intrigued by what Tipp are going to bring to the party to unsettle Limerick. And I think if, like you said there, if they do look at that Cork match, they'll definitely see little facets and plays that they could get into the match. But I suppose it's like that too, is when Limerick come at them, it's how they're going to deal with Limerick coming at them, because there is periods of the game that Limerick really come after you. I think after both water breaks. We're buzzing again, are we, with signal?
Yeah, it's just breaking up just a small bit again there. We got most of that though. Like, do you think Tipperary have there's a lot of players there who played a certain way for 14, 15 years, or older players, some in their 30s. Do you think Tipp have the players that are able to run off the shoulder and break through the lines the way Cork did? Because Cork's average age must be way younger. And, does the likes of Alan Flynn now come into the team? Did he do enough the last day? I mean, that is my concern, that you look at the Tipperary team there, and I'm just not sure that they have enough players who can cover the ground enough to put Limerick on the back foot.
Yeah, I think, one player you could maybe look at and you say, look, does Tommy Connors bring that kind of all-energy game? He's a guy that has a lot of speed and can carry the ball. I'm not sure, is he at that level yet that Sheedy would trust the starter perhaps. But I think Tipp, if you're looking at it and saying, and I've been looking at Limerick over the last couple of years and saying, what could you try that maybe rattles them a little bit, that draws them out a little bit? Do you stack the 45? Do you play Shamey inside, and then in some formation bring out for 5 years and play around 45 and try to see Limerick? They'll play the 3 boys inside, the 3 full backs. So can you draw those out and leave a 1-on-1 or a 2-on-2 inside? And I don't think Limerick will do something like that. They'll probably bring back the lads and make it a battle zone. So maybe Tipp have to go in there and maybe mirror what Limerick are going to do and say, look, let's see, can our skill sets match them in there? And again, it could be that 2 or 3 lads working in little pods out in flanks or something like that, because you'd say, where can Tipp get a bit of into that match? They can shoot points from anywhere, so maybe that they say, right, we're going to stay out that middle part and maybe work the flanks and get Noel McGrath maybe out floating around besides, maybe close to Dan McCormack or something like that. Do you try something where you're going to stack both flanks with 2 or 3 lads and leave one inside and work that way and try Limerick out. Side of things and what's going to be tried.
And hopefully you can hear me again there. But I'm just curious to know what you think of the talk around Limerick's tackling, because when I watched the game back against Cork, there were, like, sometimes you could say maybe too much was made of it, but there was definitely a few head-high tackles, or, you know, not far off clothesline tackles there. Like, John Kiely talked about it, you know, it was brought up to him a while back, and he talked about Galway maybe diving on the ground, apologised for it later on. But there's a lot of focus on Limerick's tackling, and I think some of it is probably over the top. I don't know what you think of it.
Yeah, I felt just that the Shamie Flanagan was hard done by in the league against Waterford. I felt that was something he was, you know, in my opinion, he was unjustly put off for. But I think he was a very lucky boy the last day. The swipe in across in the first half that he caught, I think Sean O'Donoghue maybe in the helmet coming out, he caught him right across the face guard. It was a high risk kind of a swoop. I think, you know, we often talk about, you know, the refs making these decisions, but I think as a player, if you present a referee with an opportunity and you kind of flick in head high on somebody and catch him in the face guard, you have to be very, very careful with that. I suppose what I see is with Limerick, I think, you know, they're obviously a very big physical team, and I admire how they play. I really admire what they've done the last couple of years to get where they got, because their skill level is definitely not in strategy. You know, I think we can say they're all brawn and in, but I do think they play on the edge, and I think all good teams play on the edge. But I suppose I've noticed a few times, I think what they seem to be doing is when guys are low, I've noticed once or twice, they kind of come in and when lads have their heads down, they're kind of coming in very hard with kind of hip. And I think you can catch lads into rucks with, you know, like that. I think if you catch someone, you know, you're looking at, I suppose it's borderline clearing out lads out of the way, or, you know, and they do hit hard. But I suppose, look, I don't think you could level that they're a dirty team in any way, shape or form. I think, you know, there's obviously a balance between playing on the edge, and you'd say, yeah, one or two of them are definitely treading the line at the moment. I think you know, Gerard Hegarty has to be careful. I think I love how he plays. I think he brings so much in terms of his scoring and his energy and stuff. And you want, look, I suppose the game is built around those three guys, Morrissey and himself, tackling hard. But I suppose you have to be really, really disciplined now, because I think when it's been talked of, and it is being talked of, whether fairly or unfairly, I think as a player, if I'm hearing that, I think you have to definitely temper your approach a little bit. You have to just you don't want to back down, but you have to make sure that you're not going to give a ref an opportunity to put you to the line too.
And if you were to put your neck on the block in terms of how the Munster final will go, what way are you leaning?
I don't know. I think it's Tipperary's to bring something that's going to really unsettle Limerick, and I think there's not too much. We haven't seen too many teams really put Limerick up for over a couple of years. I think even if you go back to 2 years ago when Kilkenny took them out, it was a 25-minute power play that at the start of the match they rattled Limerick, and they ultimately couldn't rescue that. They drove a hell of a lot of wides that day, and I think that performance is driving this Limerick team for the last 12 to 18 months. I think they're really stinging because of that. And in some ways, Kilkenny might have created a bit of a monster in that regard. But for me, I suppose an aging Tipperary team in some quarters, you say, what can they do to take out this Limerick team? I think it's Limerick for me. But again, I'm intrigued to know, can Eamon O'Shea and Liam Sheedy come up with something that could pull this out of the bag? Because I think Tipperary definitely have the hurlers. They have the skill level. They have the guys that can hurt any team on any given day. And I think on the right circumstances, they can definitely hurt Limerick. But that's the if. That's the if for me. I think what can they come with that might unsettle Limerick?
Yeah, and what about, do you see Kilkenny getting over the line in this one? You've managed against both Mattie Kenny, obviously the massive win you had a couple of years ago at Laois, and against Brian Cody as manager of Laois also in the league. What way do you see that going? What do you see, like, if you're a manager looking at this, how do you try and get under the skin of the other team?
I don't know. After both matches, you say it's going to be one hell of a battle because both teams really had to dig out in a little bit of, obviously they're well able to hurl when the both teams have a lot of good skilled players, but I think both definitely to the pit and they came out the victors, So in that regard, I think I'd be expecting a really, really physical, high octane game. The question probably is, can Dublin come with something like that? Can they come with the same desire again? And I think the reward for Dublin is absolutely massive. I think, you'd have probably said even 2 months ago, are they contenders in Leinster? No way. And now here they are, 73 minutes away from possibly being Leinster champions. And I think that would be a massive, massive scalp for Mattie Kenny. If he could turn around after maybe 2 indifferent seasons and win a Leinster title, I think it would be absolutely huge for Dublin. So I think if Dublin bring the same attitude that they brought the last day and the same work rate, I think we're in for a ding-dong bat. I mean, I obviously know what I'd like to happen, but I think it's going to be a very interesting Leinster final.
Yeah, like obviously you're coaching in Dublin now, but like there was this accusation before that Dublin had manufactured hurlers and this kind of thing. And then I'm looking at the team that lined out the last day, like Conor Burke, he's a bit of a pure hurler. I think Rian McBride's very tasty hurler. Keane Boland, Ronan Hayes is stepping up. I think is one of really good formers. Donald Burke, Keane O'Sullivan's a hurler. Like there are a lot of natural hurlers on this Dublin team now. It's not just the sort of the gym bunnies that they would have been somewhat labelled at as before.
I suppose in ways, but look, sometimes I think that has been said, and maybe unfairly, but there's no shortage of skill in that Dublin team at the moment. I think Donald Burke is just a really lovely looking hurler to watch him in action. He's just so natural on the ball. O'Sullivan even there, and he probably got marked a little bit tighter there against Galway last time out. But he showed a clean pair of heels to the Antrim lads, and he showed a real natural ability to finish a goal with aplomb when the chance presented itself against Antrim, and a couple of points as well. So they've a lot of really good hurlers there. I think definitely you look at it now and say, look, you couldn't.
Just breaking up a little bit again there.
See too many weak. I mean, one of them in hurling over the last 2 years. I mean, he's as well. I don't know if you got that last bit. Can you hear me there, Shane?
I can hear you again, yeah.
Yeah, no, I suppose the one lad I mentioned there as well, on top of it all, I think Dara Gray is probably, for me, pound for pound, one of the most improved players in hurling at the moment. I think he's a guy that's well capable of man-marking people and then offers a great threat going forward. He's able to pick off his points. So I think this is a Dublin team that we've all, I can honestly say, probably taken for granted a little bit over the last few years and maybe not given them enough of credit. But I think the last day, they definitely made a lot of people sit up and take notice that, Mattie has obviously done a lot of work with these lads and got them in a really good place. And I think they're probably a really good spirit in them, because I think there has to be a good spirit to pull out a performance like that the last day against Galway.
And Laois against Waterford this weekend, Clare against Wexford. I was at Laois's win over Antrim last week, 227 to 2-1, and they were very good. And considering how poor they'd been against Wexford and the league hadn't gone well, and actually it was over 500 days since the last competitive win when you were managing against Carlow in February 2020. I know you were coaching underage and stuff, so I'm not sure how much of the game you had a chance to watch back at the time. But like that's a huge win for Laois, considering you went down to Joe McDonagh if you didn't get the result.
Yeah, it was a massive win for them, and I think sometimes in a match like that, it's a final. It's no different than a final. You have nothing to lose, so you go absolutely all out for it. And Laois seems to have done that. I think whatever way they've been playing for the last while, I'm not so sure it has maybe suited them. Whereas on last Saturday, they appeared to go after the match a lot more, and I think that's one thing that I suppose any team it's finding that defensive stability, but also you have to have your teeth going forward. And I think Paddy Purcell is a guy who showed really delivered on what he's capable of doing. He's capable of doing that all the time. Two of those goals, particularly the first one, was an absolute top quality finish. But they seem to play the game a lot higher up the field, and that was what probably gave them the game, gave them an in into that match. So I suppose from their point of view, yeah, without a doubt, they're up against it now. They really are up against it next weekends. You know, what kind of psychological damage has Waterford? You know, where are they at? I suppose mind frame. So from a Laois perspective, it's a free one. They can come out and they can just let fly, have a right good go, and see where it takes them, because everyone will expect Waterford to win that and win it, you know, with a couple of points to spare. So for me, this is a massive opportunity for Laois to just have a go and again see where they're at for going forward. Is
it a similar circumstance to when you were managing 2 years ago and you'd won the Joe McDonagh and it was a free hit against Dublin? No one outside the camp expected anything.
Yeah, a little bit, but I suppose that was maybe a different set of circumstances. You're coming out to win a cup on Leinster final day, you know, something like what we're going to see Saturday night. So there was a huge, incredible high there at the moment, and sometimes I think players don't get too hung up on you know what's at stake here, because I think sometimes if you're looking at a bigger opposition, you can sometimes be betting your own head before you go out, whereas the lads that time were just on a high, so they had no kind of they didn't think too much about the opposition and they just went and hurled. So it's a little bit different now. I think again they're coming off a good positive, they're coming off a good high, and they can have a go. But I think it's probably slightly different.
And like, just to even recall that day, like how good was it when that final whistle went?
Yeah, look, it's something we've been lucky enough. We've been given a nice bit of airtime to wallow in that a little bit. But yeah, no, it's particularly satisfying when you see a bunch of guys, and I suppose they've suffered a nice bit over the last few years in Laois, because they just haven't been performing. They've struggled, and it was great to see a bunch of guys who, you know, maybe hadn't the belief and the confidence in themselves, and you know, in 8 or 9 months be able to turn around and deliver something like that, and maybe convince themselves and restore the even the supporters to back them a little bit more and say, look, they are good enough when they're there, you know, when they prepare right and when they get ready and they have that confidence. And that's something that, you know, it's not easy. It's very easy to talk about that now, but yeah, it was particularly satisfying to see the players go out and to see what it meant to them, and particularly, I suppose, to their family and friends and their club mates. It was just a really good day for Laois hurling, and the satisfaction that I drew out of that was just seeing how much they all got such a kick out of it, and to see players, you know, be as good as they can be.
And then just the final game I want to ask you about is Clare Wexford. So, like, obviously this is going to be pitched out as Davy Fitz against Brian Lohan again. There's obviously coolness between them. They're not the best of buddies. Then there's the whole fallout with the county board there over the winter and whether they're supporting Brian Lohan and all that kind of stuff. Like, if you're a manager and you hear all this talk going on around, you know, the management, let's say you were managing against Brian Cody or whatever, this kind of stuff, does that bother you at all, or is it water off a duck's back?
I think this is a very, very unique occasion. I think this is akin to, the magnitude of it is, for me, is something that you maybe wouldn't even get in an All-Ireland final. I think there is so much subplots, there's so much backdrop. It's just, I don't think you'd get it in, you know, one of Shakespeare's plays. I think there's so much going on, and I don't say that lightly. I just think this has been building up, and there's obviously the two managers. I think this is probably the first and only time, you know, where 15 players going toe to toe. I think the magnitude of it and the impact of it, like that you go, you know, either of them are obviously not going to come out and say to their players, do this one for the gaffer, but I think there's just so much going on here. I'm getting out the popcorn for this one, and I'd love to if there's about 5 different camera angles, and I know I'm playing that up and dramatizing it a little bit, but I just think it's a massive game and there's so much at stake, and I can't wait for this one.
And so, like, for that reason, it's very important to try and find the right tone for this game, because, like, Davy Fitz has a bad record playing against his Clare team in the last couple of years. And, like, I kind of, speaking to Michael Verney about this, the whole idea of Alex Ferguson, and he'd have big speeches and he'd always find the right tone. And Roy Keane had had mentioned that one day they played against Spurs and he's like, look, it's Tottenham. So you have to try and find the right balance. So like Davy is going to have to be able to, or make sure he says the right things. And even though he'll want them to do it for him, he can't necessarily go in and say, you know, like you've already said it. So finding the right tone must be massive for a manager.
Yeah, what this is really is like both managers, you know, want the other lads, you know, blood spills. That's the reality of it. They want to beat him, but aside from that, I suppose it's a real test of both men's professionalism in terms of they have to, you know, keep the emotion out of it, and that's the big challenge, I think, to say no, this is a championship match, lads. This is our in or out now for the rest of the year, and I think what you want is you don't want to lose your control, and if that lack of control feeds through to your players, then they're going to be a little bit all over the place and disjointed. So I think that's the one thing that both possibly need is, and I'm sure, look, in their own ways they will, but it's possibly somebody that's attached to your backroom team really needs to say, look, we plan out what we say to the players here, because that's important now. You definitely don't want to let your emotions get too caught up in this and that it impacts on your players. You want your players to go out and be wound up enough and relaxed enough to go and perform. I think the one thing you don't want to do is put that pressure on them of additional pride. I think the reality is, you say, no, lads, this is to keep us in the championship. This is to get another day out in the championship in this year. Otherwise, you go home and you just lick your wounds. So I think that's the big challenge for both managers, and whichever manages that the better, I think, and gets their charges focused on the task at hand is the key to it. And I think sometimes we've definitely seen one of them get the giddiness gets the better of them from time to time, or more often than not. But I think we know what kind of emotion Davy is going to bring to it. Brian is definitely a little bit more sedate or measured in how he delivers it, but
just broke up there again, Eddie. Hopefully it comes back on there. It's a shame now. I think we might leave it there, so Eddie, because it's just not quite coming back. So my thanks very much to Eddie Brennan, and get your comments in and let us know what you think of that.